Hello again. I'm sure that for many viewers, the highlight of the presidential election in the United States last year was hearing Joe Biden solemnly assure an audience of black voters, perhaps when he was not aware that he was being filmed, that a black man invented the electric light bulb, not a white guy named Edison. This was on September the 3rd last year in a church, a place called Kenosha in Wisconsin. The statement was utterly false, of course, and yet played very well with listeners. It is this kind of shameless populism and currying favour with ethnic minorities which secured for him the presidency. Since assuming office, he has kept on the same path, presumably hoping that he will in this way ensure that black voters stay on side. One of the things which he is doing is so awful that I shall have to devote a separate video to it, perhaps later this week. This is using federal power to ensure that critical race theory is used as a perspective during history lessons in state schools. That's one thing. The other is appointing an ambassador to the United Nations, a woman who very soon made the following announcement. The original sin of slavery weaved white supremacy into our founding documents and principles. Step forward, Linda Thomas Greenfield. She made these remarks almost unbelievably when trying to get America back into the United Nations Human Rights Council. She said that she wants to engage trailblazing groups like yours. Yes, that would be the trailblazing group, which includes members such as North Korea, China, Libya, Somalia and Cuba. Yep, there are certainly some trailblazers in human rights amongst that lot, and no mistake. The mention of slavery as the original sin to a body which includes Libya and Somalia as members was so incredibly grotesque that I was left reeling. It was clear that to the new United States ambassador to the UN, slavery means the transatlantic slave trade. For her, slavery was an historical crime rather than a modern disaster. This is because the institution of slavery and its legacy, which of course included segregation up until the 1960s, affected her and her family personally. This can be the only possible explanation, because otherwise, when addressing a group which includes Libya, she would perhaps have mentioned the disquieting fact that there are today in Africa, right this minute, over 9 million slaves. That is, for comparison, more than twice as many slaves as there were in the Confederate States at the start of the American Civil War. Weird that she did not mention this. There are countless slaves in Libya. These are black people who have been lured to the country by people traffickers who take money from them under the promise of smuggling them into Europe. So in other words, they're lured from sub-Saharan Africa and across the Sahara into Libya and told that they'll be put on boats to Europe. Once in Libya, a lot of these unfortunate souls are sold into slavery. And I mean sold as in the sense that there are slave markets and slave auctions in Libya. I include in the description to this video a brief piece by Time magazine about this atrocious trade. This particular piece was made a few years ago and the situation is much worse now. There are at this very minute slave markets in Libya where black Africans are being auctioned off. Somalia is even worse. How could a black woman who is the United States ambassador to the United Nations address a body concerned with human rights that includes as a member Libya without mentioning this? I think we can safely assume that she knows about it. The explanation is simple and disgusting. There are serious moves afoot to make financial reparation to African Americans for the sufferings of their ancestors as slaves. In plain terms, this means giving a sum of money to every black person in America. That this will happen is by no means certain, but the demands for such a move are growing. I suspect that this time round the expectation is that it will amount to something more than 40 acres and a mule. If African Americans keep banging on about slavery in the 19th century, they stand to gain money. If, on the other hand, they campaign to stop slavery in Africa right now, this will mean the government will have to spend money. That's to say, spend money doing something about it to bring the practice to an end. Ultimately, such an action would cost money which would have to be paid for from people's taxes. So it is that continuing to harp on about slavery 200 years ago might bring people money, but fretting about the plight of African slaves today would cost them money. I think this is what is sometimes described as